Now let's get right into it, because this is the top story for this week. It is the huge announcement that Tony Khan promised to make on Dynamite Wednesday night, one that he said would make hardcore wrestling fans very happy. It had nothing to do with Ring of Honor or HBO Max or a UK Stadium show or anything of the sort. Sunday night, June 26th, live on pay-per-view from the United Center in Chicago, AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling will be running a joint show called Forbidden Door, featuring the stars of AEW against the stars of New Japan. It's happening. It's finally happening. This is going to be a lot of fun. Tickets for the show go on sale Friday, May 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern. It's going to be airing not only on traditional pay-per-view, but on the Bleacher Report app here in the US and on Fight TV internationally. Time-wise, makes all the sense in the world, given that it falls during a dead period in the New Japan schedule after their big Dominion show on June 12th and before the G1 Climax, which doesn't begin until July 16th, which means that all the big names, the ones who are not hurt, should be available for this show. I saw Okada teasing on his Instagram the other day that he might not be there because his wife's birthday falls around that time. I think it's the day before, maybe. Please. He'll be there. He can bring his wife with him. He could take her to a ball game at Wrigley Field as a birthday present. Unless he wants to stay married, then he might want to come up with a better gift, but he can bring her along for the ride. I don't see there being any way they do a joint show like this on pay-per-view and not have Okada on the card. Now, I'm not sure if there's going to be any women's matches on the show. Right now, there is no Stardom involvement planned, only New Japan. But New Japan and Stardom, they are both owned by the same parent company. So if you think that, Kairi Hojo against Thunder Rosa would be a fun match, and I agree it would be, it's always possible. But it played out like this on Wednesday. Tony Khan came out to introduce the president of New Japan, Takami Obari. He walked out, but before they can make the announcement, Adam Cole appeared on the big screen. He made the announcement himself and said that he would be wrestling Tomohiro Ishii on Rampage Friday night in an Owen Hart Cup qualifying match as a small preview of what people can expect at the pay-per-view. Switchblade Jay White then walked out. He said that for the Undisputed Elite and for the Bullet Club, it is still their era. When AEW was first formed, one of my great hopes, and I was very vocal about this at the time, as you know, was that we would get to see some sort of working relationship between these two companies, and we would see New Japan stars occasionally being able to appear on AEW television. This was at a time when the New Japan product was a lot hotter than it is right now. But there were a lot of hurt feelings at the time with the way that Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, they had left New Japan to form AEW. And AEW was an unproven commodity at that point. They also had the working relationship New Japan did with Ring of Honor for a number of years. Hangman Page was another one. New Japan lost a good chunk of talent that ultimately went to help form the foundation of AEW. And it was only after the last president of New Japan, Harold Mage, had left that relations between the two sides really began to thaw out. We've seen a lot of New Japan talent since then make appearances on AEW television. Kenta, I think, was the first one to show up on Dynamite. And then we had Yuji Nagata come in for a match with Jon Moxley. There was a pay-per-view, it might have been All Out, where Moxley wrestled Satoshi Kojima. We've seen Rocky Romero, who really has been the bridge between the two companies. Obviously, Minoru Suzuki has made a number of appearances. Suzuki was back in Pittsburgh on Wednesday night. He was wrestling QT Marshall for a match that airs on Dark Elevation this week. And that's been fun. Having some of those names, it's been fun, but it's still not the matches that a lot of people have been wanting to see. The matches with the top stars. The top stars, the top champions from both companies wrestling one another. COVID made it impossible to do a show like this before now. And they're still dealing with the restrictions in Japan. You can't cheer or boo or make any real noise at those shows, only with your hands. You can clap. That's about it. So this is something that has been a long time in the making. New Japan has done joint shows with other promotions before. Most notably, they did a bunch of them with WCW back in the 90s. But the last time we saw something like this was the joint show that New Japan did with Ring of Honor. When they sold out Madison Square Garden over WrestleMania weekend in 2019. I was at that show. WWE tried to shut them down and failed. They didn't want them running the Garden. The McMahon family, they had a lock on Madison Square Garden when it came to pro wrestling for 60 years. But they couldn't stop it, and they went in there and they sold the place out. What sold it out, I think, was less Ring of Honor and more New Japan. It was a joint effort. But without the New Japan influence on that show, they would not have sold out. It was a novelty thing. It was something that had not been done before. But a lot of the matches on that show were not Ring of Honor against New Japan so much as they were Ring of Honor against Ring of Honor. They were New Japan against New Japan. Okada beat Jay White in the main event that night to win the IWGP title. Kota Ibushi beat Tetsuya Naito to win the Intercontinental title. And that was great, but it wasn't a true inter-promotional show in the sense that you would, like a supercard, in the sense that you would expect there to be lots of matches with one group against the other. That's where this show could really blow that one out of the water. And without even knowing a single match on that card in June, I am sure that this show will blow that one away. But this could not be coming at a better time for New Japan. New Japan, more so than AEW, really benefits from this because the product has not been this cold in a very long time. The pandemic really wreaked havoc on their business, and injuries haven't helped. Kota Ibushi, I mentioned him. He may not be back in time for this show. He's been out since October with an injury that he suffered on a Phoenix Splash in the G1 Finals. That match had to be stopped. He was only supposed to be out for a couple of months, and here we are 6 months later. Sonata, he surrendered the IWGP US title 2 weeks ago due to an orbital fracture he suffered last month. He doesn't know how much longer he's going to be out for. I think especially heading into the G1, this could give them a nice shot in the arm. But it didn't take long for people, many of them with Sasha Banks and Roman Reigns as their profile pictures, and others as well. There's so many dumb things I've seen this way. I mean, the guy who writes for Forbes, the one who puts out the Fast Nationals that, WWE feeds him every week for Rampage, except that 1 week where Rampage actually went up. Then he suddenly went silent. What a coincidence. But all of these clowns shouting and trolling in unison about what a terrible idea this all is because it doesn't attract new fans. It doesn't attract new viewers to the AEW product when all they're doing is playing to their base. I even saw people claiming that this was Tony Khan's response to WWE's announcement of a UK stadium show over Labor Day weekend, even though one has absolutely nothing to do with the other. I swear, it's like a coping mechanism for these people. When they see other people excited about something, their tiny little brains, they can't handle it. The number of absolutely brain-dead takes that I have seen about this show in the last few days was mind-blowing. I can guarantee you not one of these people actually care whether or not AEW attracts a single new fan. Not one. It's just a talking point that they spread around. I don't get it. I do not understand the obsession over whether this specific show attracts the casual viewer. This is one day out of 365 on the calendar. Who gives a shit? My God, these people are insufferable. Yes, this announcement caters to the hardcore wrestling fans. Tony Khan said as much before the announcement was even made. This is not breaking news. He said he thought it would make wrestling fans very happy when they found out what it was. How dare he? How dare Tony Khan cater to wrestling fans on his wrestling show? I am a hardcore wrestling fan. I host a wrestling podcast. For 15 years I've been doing this because even when there's things about it that I absolutely hate, I still love wrestling. I love talking about it. I love watching it. I love doing commentary for it. Every single one of you listening to this right now, you love wrestling too, or else you wouldn't be wasting your time listening to a wrestling podcast. I know this is going to be a hard concept for some people to understand, but you can appeal to more than one audience. Tony Khan can walk and chew gum at the same time. He can do different things to appeal to multiple audiences. And if you want to have a debate about whether or not Tony Khan is doing anything else to appeal to a broader audience, that's a completely different debate. We're talking about this particular show. He can take one day out of the calendar year to host a show like this to appease his audience. Doing something fun like working with other promotions and running a show that will sell out the United Center is not going to suddenly chase away these elusive casual fans that we always hear so much about, the casual fan. You know what will chase these supposedly casual fans away? This community. Because the minute they go online and they try to engage with other wrestling fans and they see how toxic it all is and how stupid half these people are, they're going to head for the exits. I don't know if it's jealousy because WWE has the capacity to do stuff like this and they choose not to. So these people feel left out when everybody online is talking about this stuff, or if they're just completely miserable 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But it's pathetic. All the debating online about how this fails to create new fans, these people are missing the entire point. That's not why this is being done. Tony Khan is a wrestling fan. People make fun of him for being a wrestling geek. He knows the history and the stats, and he used to go to ECW shows. When he was younger, he was a Ring of Honor fan. It's why he bought Ring of Honor. He bought it largely because he has an affinity for it. Ring of Honor was a dead promotion. They had some talented people, but Ring of Honor was a dead promotion. Sinclair all but shut it down for good last year. And Tony Khan swooped in, and he bought it because he thinks he can restore it to some kind of past glory and make Ring of Honor a force once again in the wrestling business. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it doesn't hurt to have somebody willing to put the resources, i.e. money, into it, who is a fan of the product and wants to see it succeed. Vince McMahon could not possibly care any less about Ring of Honor. WWE would have been happy to just make use of the tape library and shut the whole thing down. If they wanted it that badly, believe me, WWE could have had the whole damn thing. Tony Khan wanted it, and he got it, because he's a fan. He used to browse wrestling message boards. Maybe he still does. Listens to podcasts. So why do you think he wouldn't want to put together a big fantasy card between these two companies? It's what fans do all the time. They fantasy book. Tony Khan is what happens when you have a wrestling fan with billions of dollars. Instead of just talking about it, he actually made it happen. I think that's great, because I am the audience for this sort of thing. I don't give a shit about the casual fan who's going to tune in and watch wrestling for a few minutes each week and then flip on to something else. Why is that any of my concern? Let him worry about that. That's not what this is about. By the way, here's another benefit to doing something like this. How many wrestlers do you think would love the chance to work against New Japan talent? To work shots for New Japan, maybe even other promotions in Japan and other parts of the world too, not just Japan. You're not going to be able to do that in WWE. Things like this make AEW a more attractive landing spot for some talent. Maybe that's also why he's so open to working with other companies, because he thinks it might help when it comes to talent that he wants, because he and Vince McMahon, they're fighting from the same pool. There's talent that both companies want. I saw this report this week that WWE has great interest in bringing FTR back to the company. I'll bet they do. I'll bet FTR opened a lot of eyes with their recent run. They're pulling from the same pool of talent. If doing stuff like this and opening up borders might, pique the interest of even just a handful of those talents that both companies are going after, it could give Tony Khan and AEW a leg up. So that's another, maybe unintended benefit of him doing something like this. Tony Khan got $175 million for 4 years of television with WarnerMedia. He did that by catering to hardcore wrestling fans. And he is very likely going to get more than that when it comes time to negotiate a new deal next year. Whether that's with WarnerMedia or some other entity, that we don't know. This merger with Warner and Discovery, it could be a problem. If they're looking to cut costs, they just shit-canned CNN Plus after a whopping 30 days. So I think it definitely has to be a concern. You never know how these things are going to shake out when new management takes over. Remember what happened with WCW. It only took one man to decide that he didn't like wrestling on their networks and he canceled it. But I think AEW is doing pretty well for a company that preaches to the choir when it comes to their audience. I think they're going to be just fine. Earlier this year, Okada, he gave an interview to Sports Illustrated. It may have been to promote Wrestle Kingdom. And in that interview, he said Bryan Danielson and CM Punk would make for some incredible matches. A lot of those dream match scenarios are about getting excited for the possibilities. And once the match is done, it's done. So it's important to keep that excitement and anticipation. Still, if we wait too long, they'll both retire eventually. So I want to face them both while they're still active. And in response, Punk tweeted, "Here's my address, come see me." And then he gave the address for the United Center in Chicago. This was back in January. And now here we are. There are lots of match possibilities, not only for this show, but for future collaborations between the two companies, whether it be here, whether it be in Japan. I'm hopeful that we might have some AEW involvement in the G1 or on next year's Wrestle Kingdom. But for this show, there has to be the expectation that all of the big New Japan names are going to be there. That includes Okada. That includes Tanahashi. That includes Naito, Jay White, Will Ospreay. The obvious main event, because they already teased it in what I just read to you, would be Okada against CM Punk. In what could very well end up being champion against champion, which makes the finish a little dicey. Okada is the IWGP champion right now. CM Punk very likely going to challenge Hangman Page at Double or Nothing next month for the AEW title. And if he wins, then it could very well happen. Maybe they decide to save a CM Punk title win for Chicago. And instead of Punk wrestling a New Japan talent, he has a rematch with Hangman and he wins the title there. I think Punk against a New Japan star makes a lot more sense. Me personally, and I said this on the stream on Wednesday, the match that I would like to see the most is Okada against Bryan Danielson. Doesn't even need to happen on this show, but I really hope at some point in the not too distant future, we get to see that match. Now, look, it could also be a case where we get tag team matches up and down the card, very similar to what New Japan and Pro Wrestling Noah did on their show earlier this year. They had a joint interpromotional show. It was the third night of Wrestle Kingdom back in January, New Japan against Noah. I think there was a grand total of one singles match on that entire card. So that would be disappointing if it was nothing but tag team matches. I think a mix of both would be fine. I'm not oblivious to the political considerations here as far as finishes and who goes over, by running only singles matches or mostly singles matches. So here's another thought I had. How about this? You could chime in and let me know what you think. What about Okada and Tanahashi? The two, in a lot of ways, right? People talk about Austin and The Rock at the peak of WWE's Attitude Era. When I think of the two biggest names in New Japan over the last decade plus, who do I think of? I think of Okada and Tanahashi. Right? Those have been the two standard bearers. So what about Okada and Tanahashi as tag team partners, just like they were on that New Japan Against Noah card, against the Blackpool Combat Club, Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley? Moxley's already got a singles match with Tanahashi set for May 15th in DC on the New Japan show. I like that idea too. Then you get William Regal on commentary, calling an Okada and Tanahashi match. You go with that tag team match as the main event, and you do CM Punk against maybe Kenta underneath, right? Although it's Chicago, maybe that would be the main event. But that's another obvious one. GTS against GTS. Shingo Takagi against Darby Allin. I mentioned that match on Wednesday, and I keep going back to it. I just feel like that would be a fun match to see. Samoa Joe against Ishii. There's a lot of different possibilities. And then there's Kenny Omega. I don't know that he's going to be back in time to wrestle on this show. But if he can't, I would love to see him walk out at the very end to confront Okada, or at least wherever Okada's match is on the card. Out walks Kenny Omega when the match is over to confront Okada and tease the idea of one last match between the two of them. That would be a great moment. And there's also likely to be some AEW versus AEW matches, New Japan versus New Japan. Tony Khan has said that's also a possibility. You slap those on there and you've got yourself a full card. If all goes well, there'll be more of these. And the match possibilities are endless. Gives them more time to build some storylines around them as well. Wrestling as a whole should be a lot of fun through the end of the summer. You got Double or Nothing coming up. The Forbidden Door show. New Japan running the G1. I try to check out as much of that as I can. WWE is running 3 straight stadium shows, including a long overdue major show in the UK. Then you got All Out that same weekend. So wrestling as a whole, I am hopeful, should be a lot of fun through the end of the summer. But boy, Kushida sure picked a good time to become a free agent, didn't he? Kushida's contract expired recently. He has left WWE. They've already moved him over to the alumni section on their website. I guess no more jacket time. Jacket time is no more. When he left New Japan for WWE, he took a chance on himself. He wanted to see if he could make it. He had a run as the NXT Cruiserweight Champion, and there was a period of time when Triple H was still running the show that they kept Kushida very strong, unusually strong, and protected him for what looked like may have been a main event program with Finn Balor over the NXT Championship, which even the two of them were teasing it on social media. Balor got his jaw broken. I think that was during the feud with Kyle O'Reilly, and he was gone for a little while. And I think at that point, they just didn't know what to do with Kushida. I still maintain the only reason they kept Kushida undefeated or just as strong as he was booked for that period of time in the fall of, I guess that would have been 2020, is because they were prepping him for a program and probably a loss to Finn Balor. When Balor got hurt, and they didn't know when he was going to be able to come back, they didn't know what to do with Kushida. And it wasn't long after that he started losing matches on television. Once they relaunched NXT and they launched the 2.0 version of the brand, that's when he got forced into a tag team with Ikemen and Jiro. And, once Triple H went down and they blew up NXT, Kushida had no future there. 38 years old, a lot of years in the business, small guy whose first language wasn't English. He had no future on the main roster. There was no longer any place for him. Why would he resign? So the expectation is that he'll be returning to New Japan probably in June, which would coincide with the Forbidden Door pay-per-view if they want him on there. Maybe they could get Alex Shelley in for at least one appearance. They could reunite the Time Splitters. If only for one night. Time Splitters against one of the AEW tag teams, against the Young Bucks, or maybe the Lucha Bros.